What if I told you that this box does and does not contain a true Jedi at the same time? What sounds like a weird Star Wars version of the Schrödinger's cat is actually a very interesting vintage watch story that is unique to this model right here inside this box. And if you would like to stay some time and listen, I will tell you this exact story right now. My name is Jan and you're watching the Time Channel. So, last time I told you about the very first additions to my collection, but this time I have to jump forward because I just got a new addition to my collection and I'm very, very proud of this one. That's why I immediately want to talk about it. And while I unpack this, I will tell you what's so exciting about it. So I'm not sure if you've ever bought a vintage piece or you've been looking for half a year for a specific vintage piece, because I just have. And it finally popped up in France, a very, very good version of the watch that I was looking for. So you can see it has the original box and papers with it, which makes it even more exciting for me because this is not a new watch. It is actually roughly 45 years old. So this one was bought in 1975 in Andorra, Spain. And as you can already see here, if you're familiar with it, it is an OMEGA ST 176.005, or as well I would call it, a true Jedi. So let's open this one up. Put away the paper box and have a look inside. Wow. What a beauty it is. Your opinions might differ because this is a very, very, well, extravagant piece, but I think it's just beautiful. And I want to take some time and talk about this OMEGA Seamaster Automatic. So, why is it considered controversial to call this watch the OMEGA Jedi? Let me tell you about it. So, I think this controversy about the title, or unofficial title, because Omega never called this one or any other watch a Jedi, is a very, very interesting story that only vintage watches can provide. The name or the nickname Jedi was actually branded by a very famous collector for vintage Omega watches and Hoyer watches, who was called Chuck Maddox. And he didn't coin those watches in the 70s when these watches were actually made, but he coined the term in the 90s when he called a different model, which is the for example, the Anakin Skywalker or the Darth Vader, due to their color scheme. So apart from that, afterwards, he dubbed another OMEGA Seamaster, the reference 145.024, with the hand-wound movement. He dubbed the actual Jedi. Now, after this title is a little bit jumbled, actually the one that Chuck Maddox initially meant with the Jedi is now called the Flat Jedi. And if you look up this model or just type in OMEGA Jedi into Google, you will find most probably this model. So how did that happen? It actually happened in 2007 when an auction house named their auction that is going on the Omega Mania, and in that Omega Mania catalog they featured one of these Seamaster models and actually dubbed them the so-called Jedi, thus stirring up quite some confusion with the dealers and also the people interested in this model. But nonetheless, the title stuck with this watch and actually generated a lot of buzz about this model, more buzz than it had previously gotten. So they just kept the title Jedi for this one around. And I think it is very, very fitting to this watch, because when we will talk about the watch face, and you can already see it, this watch has the blue hands, which are very reminiscent of a blue lightsaber, while, and I would call it that, the other Jedi is basically a flat Jedi, not only in the sense of its case shape, but also since the dial is basically just silver, and compared to this beauty, it's, well, flat. So the case, aside from its very, very unique shape, is actually 42 millimeters in width without the crown, but a whopping 48 millimeters in height. So, well, luck to luck, even though they are integrated. And in terms of height, this model actually has 50 millimeters. So 50 millimeters makes it quite a large watch on your wrist. But I think with that TV-shaped case, it has a nice vintage look that you can actually spot from across the room, and well, I think can easily be a conversation starter. This watch was also available in plated gold, so maybe you will see some of those around if you Google it. And they actually had the reference name starting with MD, while this one has a starting ST and then number, because it is, well, the stainless steel version. The case in general is very nice and tonneau shaped, which is very good looking, I think. And I was very happy to actually find this one on the stainless steel bracelet. So this is the OMEGA 1171 stainless steel bracelet with the foldable clasp and the nice OMEGA logo on the clasp as well. And if you look closely, and I hope you can see it, this is really in a NOS condition, you would call it. So if you look up vintage watches, you will see the term NOS a lot. It is actually easily translated to new old stock, and basically means even though it's an older model, or, well, this one is 45 years old, it wasn't worn very much or doesn't have any signs of wear on it. So you can see that you all still see the brushing on the case. Some versions of this watch you can already see that they have been polished a lot, so they basically look like a shiny chrome here, because they've been just polished to remove any scratches on them. And additionally, the edges here on some of the models that I saw online were already worn and pretty much rounded up because of the polishing. And this one, I think, is in a really, really good condition, and that's why I'm so happy that I found this one in France. And I immediately got in contact with the dealer there, and we struck a deal, and yeah, I can finally wear this beautiful piece. So in order to talk a little bit more about the dial, I actually took the watch off again. We already, well, quickly or briefly talked about the very striking blue chronograph seconds hand on this watch. But I think there's a lot going on this very stylish, yet also, I think, aside from maybe the case size, very dressy looking dial. And immediately you can see the rehaut, or the very sharp wedge ramp outer rim of the dial, which actually features on the inside a tachymeter scale, which you can probably see better when I show you some macro shots of it. And if you're not familiar with a tachymeter scale or tachymeter scale, it actually lets you, when you stop something, immediately calculate how much or how many of those actions you can do in a full hour. So the typical example would be you stop with your seconds hand, how long it takes you to, well, travel 1 kilometer, and you will immediately then read off on the outer rim how many kilometers per hour you can actually make if you keep going at the same speed. And Well, yeah, let's talk about the most striking properties, the two light blue chronograph central hands, which are right now overlapping at 12 o'clock, so you can basically only see one of those hands. But if I start the chronograph, you can see that the seconds hand starts moving, while the minutes hand, as a jet hand, due to its shape, will only slowly start moving again as well with the minutes. So I think this gives this watch already a very, very interesting look. Additional to that, you have small blue sub-hands for the hour counter, which is positioned on a dial at 6 o'clock. And you can also have a running black seconds hand here at 9 o'clock and underneath it, and that is very interesting, and I will show you that in a macro shot as well, because the hour hand is now right above it. You have a 24-hour disc here as well. So underneath the running seconds hand, there's a disc which is also moving, and it has a small blue triangle that actually denotes the same time as the central hands, but on a 24-hour day and night scale. And what is very interesting about this watch as well, and that's something you can find with vintage pieces, are the hands. And actually, close to the indices, there are little pearl-like dots which should actually have lume on them. But as it goes with vintage pieces, this one has tritium lume, so actually radioactive material. But since tritium has a half-life of roughly 12 years, so after 12 years of its initial production, the lume was actually only maybe at half of its strength. After 45 years, you can basically see nothing, so it would make no sense to make a lume shot of this watch because you wouldn't be able to see anything at all. On the back, you can see the so-called hippocampus here. That's the official logo of the Seamaster models, which is engraved in the caseback. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a see-through case, but nonetheless, I think this is a very, very nice looking caseback with the small Omega logo here as well, and the Seamaster name here above. So let's talk a little bit about the movement, and this one has a very, very interesting movement again, as I think, well, most of my watches do. And this has an automatic movement, so actually the first automatic chronograph movement that Omega put into their watches. This is the Omega 1040 from 1970. And if you pay close attention to the history of automatic chronographs, 1970 is actually just 1 year after the famous Heuer-Buren-Breitling group, or Zenith, published the very, very first automatic chronograph movements. So this one is based on a Lemania 1340 with a bidirectional rotor for winding up your watch during your wear. And it has 28,800 beats per hour, which translates to 4 Hertz full oscillations. Or again, if you look closely at the seconds hand, you could maybe see that it ticks away at 8 beats per second. It has an Inca block shock absorbing system, and when I will show you some pictures of the movement, you can see that compared to its base Lemania counterpart, the Omega 1 is usually easily spotted by its copper color. Now finally, about the price. So you can get this model, so the ST176.005, for starting at roughly 1,700 euros already, which I think is very, very cheap for such a beautiful Omega, well, vintage piece, especially since it's an automatic. Nonetheless, the ones starting at 1,700 euros usually do not come on a bracelet, and most of them do look very, very scratched up, or as I told you, are polished very, very intensively, and thus generating a very different look of this watch. So this one was a little bit more expensive since it came with the original box and the papers, and it is in an absolutely stunning condition. So to find one of these, you would actually go towards 2,300 euros. I think this watch is very, very worth it. So there you have it. I think this is a very interesting story, and you're free now to actually call this whatever you like, since it's of course not an official name. You can call it the Jedi, you can call it the Rogue Jedi, you can call it the Not Jedi, or you could just call it the 176.005. I think everything's fine by me, as long as you acknowledge that this is a very interesting and special piece in the Omega history. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for more very unique pieces on this channel, and see you in the next one. Bye.